Hi, it's Chris Titley here, and on today's episode of Scoreboard, the podcast, I am welcomed by Christie Jenkins. We're sitting here on Monday, the 26th of May, 2025. Christie, welcome to Scoreboard.
Thank you. Sounds like I'm welcoming you.
Yes, I'm excited to do this podcast, only because we had our first correspondence maybe a few months ago, and things were a lot going on with both of our lives, but now we're here on this beautiful Monday morning. How's your Monday morning been? How was your weekend been, Christie?
I spent the weekend moving from Melbourne to Sydney, so my life is chaotic and in boxes.
Chaotic and in boxes. And what was the catalyst for the move?
I got a new job, and so I'm leading a startup accelerator. I'm the managing director for Techstars in Australia, so pretty excited actually. I get to invest in 12 early stage startups this year and then run a program to help them accelerate.
Right, and coming from your sporting background, there's lots of different overlays with sport and business and startups, etc. But there's corporate Australia, which is the more established companies, but then there's the early stage companies. Can you talk about the sort of similarities around sport and early stage companies?
I think the similarity is in the people, and so one of my favorite things about sport is that athletes are this unique type of person that have these wild ambitions to be the best in the world and the commitment to dedicate decades of their life to that goal. And startups are very much the same, right? Takes a little bit of craziness, perhaps, to set a wildly ambitious goal to build a company, know that it will take decades of commitment and still willingly put yourself on that journey. And so to me, the overlap is the people, and athletes are my favorite people to spend time with. And now on the career front, founders have an almost identical mindset.
Brilliant. And Christie, your connection with sport for the listeners out there, multiple sports. I'd love to take us back to early Christie and talking about goals as a young child and the sports that you played and your career within the sporting landscape.
I have played 3 sports at a professional level. So I grew up doing trampolining, which is a real sport. Think jumping 10 meters high in the air and doing double and triple somersaults with twists. And so I started that at age 5, did it for 17 years, was national champion 12 years in a row, top 10 in the world for a number of years. And it's a gymnastic sport. So you do I would say, have a shorter longevity in that sport than other sports. Retired in my early 20s and maybe wasn't quite ready to give up the identity of being an athlete. And so immediately jumped into 2 other sports. I started CrossFit and beach volleyball. And so went to the CrossFit Games in 2014 and some of the semi-final and stuff events around that as well. And then also played beach volleyball for 12 years, 7 of those years playing on the world tour, world games, world beach games, very blessed to have played for my country for so many years in so many sports.
And sport has taken you around the world geographically as well, by the sounds of it. There's so many benefits to sport, but I'm going to ask you what your love is, your favourite, if there is a favourite of a favourite children.
People always ask me this. I think it's easy to pick the least favourite, which is probably CrossFit, because that is the sport of suffering. Right. It is just how much can you hurt and how bad do you want it? But, there are things to love about every sport. Trampolining was just insanely rewarding in that you were in complete control, right? And so theoretically, you could get a 10 out of 10 score. And so at the end of the day, when you're looking at your results or your performance, it's 100% on you. And I really loved that personal accountability in that sport and that striving to do a perfect routine. When you come to volleyball, it's very different, right? You can lose 1 point and be I'm going to win the next one. Don't stress about it. And the lifestyle's totally different. You have a partner on the court, you have someone to bounce off, you have an opponent, you have the conditions. So you have all these external variables, and not that much is within your control. But it's way more fun, right? You get to celebrate the points, you get to travel around the world. I spent my time on the best beaches in the world. And so very different lifestyle, but, incredibly fun. I don't know. I can't pick a favourite.
You can't pick a favourite. I'm interested to know the correlation of the skill set traits through all of them that are common, and also the mental traits that are common through all of them.
I wish there was more overlap, but honestly, I think I picked a poor collection of sports that have limited overlap.
The graph's sort of like a bit wayward in terms of
Yeah,
correlation. Yeah, yeah.
honestly, like jumping high is probably the like most physical thing that crosses over. Um, I had to unlearn so many things going from trampolining to beach volleyball because, yeah, I was athletic, but I'd never played a ball sport. And so when I started, I used to jump in the air and swing my arm at the ball and just miss completely. It was like quite embarrassing. People were like, but you look like an athlete. You are not performing like one. You look, extremely uncoordinated on the sand. And so like I really had to learn like a completely new skill set around managing the ball and reacting to something external to me. And I think the mentality of being an athlete and the work ethic and the discipline and working with a coach and loving feedback, that all translates. But dealing with pressure was something I also had to unlearn between the sports as well. And so in a gymnastics type sport, when you are nervous, you squeeze every muscle as tight as you can and you do better. In a ball sport, you squeeze every muscle as tight as you can, you will not play better. The ball will just like ricochet off your arms in a random direction. And so untraining your response to pressure was actually very difficult for me and took many years. And so there's almost no overlap between those two sports. CrossFit is maybe the exception here because, like I know how to walk on my hands. I know how to like lift a heavy weight. And so like that was probably the easiest transition for me. But my coach, he was like, you have strong legs from all those years of trampolining. He's like, your arms are like twigs. And this is crazy, right? Like I could climb a rope without using my legs. And he's like, your arms are like twigs, which they were in CrossFit standards. And so every day I was doing all of this like extra upper body work, like pull-ups and pressing and benching and muscle ups just to try and get my arms to the CrossFit standard. And so, yeah, there's not that much overlap. And maybe I should have done what many people do and like play indoor volleyball and then beach volleyball.
Yeah, yes. When I say the word trampolining or I say the word beach volleyball or CrossFit, what are the words that spring up to your mind for each of those sports now?
I mean, all those words feel very personal to me, right? They're part of my identity. And I think it was tough when I retired from each of them to kind of loosen that identity a little bit. And yeah, I feel a lot of ownership over those words.
You feel proud?
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
I think every athlete looks back on their career and is like, oh, I could have done that one different. Oh, that point that didn't go my way. Or like that one step on my landing that cost me a medal. I think everybody looks back at that. But like if I look at the broad spectrum of my career, like top 10 in the world in 3 sports, like number 1 in the country in 3 sports, like that's insane.
It is insane. You should be very proud. The idea around trying your best and coming up short is something which I've explored a number of podcasts. But how did you go with that and how did you deal with that where you probably gave everything but things just didn't go your way? Maybe it was a little point here or a point there or a moment here, moment there.
I think it depends on where in the timeline of your career you are. And so when you're early in your sporting career, you're like, I want to be number 1 in the world, right? And now obviously you go to your first world championships, you don't come first, right? Because you're just not good enough yet. But that's totally fine because you might do the best routine you can or perform the best you can and you are on the journey to hitting that goal, right? Are you like on track? I think is the first question. And so I think if you're on track and you didn't win, totally fine, right? I think where you get real disappointment is where you're like, I have this maybe a stretch goal for myself, but it is like within my capability set and I'm at the end of my career and this is like one of the last few chances. And then it is like, honestly, fairly crushing. My last world championships for trampolining, I basically 100 people show up, the 100 best athletes in the world, 8 people make finals. And then once you're in finals, it's like a whole different game because everybody like ups their difficulty. And so I came 8th. And then I was equal eighth with another girl, and they put her in finals and bumped me out on a tie break, right? And I was just like so crushed. And then I watched the final and I was like, man, if I was in the finals, I probably would have got silver or bronze. Just like looking at what the athletes did, like crushing. I had another tournament in beach volleyball where it's the World Beach Games. You're playing, which is like the Olympics, but for all the beach and action sports. And we're playing 4-on-4 beach volleyball, so like a really fresh format, which is tons of fun for both the spectators and the players. And we're in the bronze medal match, and the umpire makes a bad call on match point and gives the game to Canada. And it's just like, that's your one shot to get a medal on that stage. And those games are only held every 4 years. And, like, what can you do with it at that point? It's crushing.
There's some things which you can control. You can control your controllables and you can't control your uncontrollables, but then you've pretty much controlled all your controllables, and then something externals just happen to kind of swing things around. I
don't know. I mean, the argument is you should be so much better
that you're ahead.
Like, you're ahead anyway, and like 1 point doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But the reality is, often sports comes down to a single centimeter or a fraction of a second.
Yep. No, I agree. I tell my my kids that sometimes when it's like really close and there's a referee's call or something, and they're like, well, if it was the AFL Grand Final last year and Brisbane were up by 60, I don't think anyone cares about the referee's call in the fourth quarter, right? So, be that up by 60, so it doesn't matter. You've mentioned the word goal and goal setting a couple of times already. How important is that? Are you a goal setter? If you are a goal setter, is it a BHAG, then a 5-year, 3-year, 2-year, 1 year? Or is it somewhere in between?
This is a really interesting question. I am someone that loves to set like crazy, seemingly impossible goals, right? If it feels achievable, it feels like it belongs on my to-do list and not my goal list. And that's great for motivation. But what I was finding was I'd get to the end of, let's say I set goals on an annual, but also a much longer term basis. I get to the end of the year and I might have 5 or 6 of these crazy super stretch goals and I wouldn't tick any of them off. And I was like, okay, this is not a great system. And so I have refined that system over time where I set super stretch goals in each category of my life because they're the thing that like make me super excited. And then I like scale them back and be like, okay, what's just the stretch version of that? And then what's the target version of that? So that I can get to the end of the year and be like, okay, like I aimed the whole year at the super, super stretch, but hey, I can be happy that I just ticked off the stretch or I made progress and got to the target. And so that is how I now set goals.
Interesting. And so the categories, just for the listeners out there again, super stretched, stretched, then what was the third one? Target, and any more? Just 3?
Just 3.
Just 3 in multiple categories.
Yeah. So like, for instance, say my goal, I do this in each category of my life. So it'd be like sport, finances, career, learning, lifestyle, right?
So 4 categories, 3 tiers.
And roughly. Then like for each category, so like let's take sport.
Yep.
Let's say my goal was like, okay, be number 1 in the country on the beach volleyball tour. That might be the super stretch if I had like never done it before. And then like the stretch might be like, okay, like make the finals twice at 2 events on the national tour. And then the target might be like make the finals once. And so each progression is like still something you would be proud of, but I get excited to aim for the super stretch.
The super stretch. And have you ever hit a super stretch goal?
Yes, but rarely on the timeline that I wanted to.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, that's great that the system works. Although the timeline, obviously, it's things you can control as well, right? And how often? You said you do it annually. Do you do it like in like January planning, holidays, etc.? Is that kind of when you do it?
Yeah, typically yes. Or the only time I'll change that timing is if I'm going through like a major life transition, like I'm leaving a job or like changing my career at a different time of the year or retiring from sport. And so then I'll like refresh my goals. But not in January.
And how often do you go back to them during the period that you set, like a year, for instance? Do you look at it every 3 months, 1 month, daily, etc.?
I don't set that many, so I kind of know them pretty well.
Yep.
And I would say in the last year and a half, I have a more structured system around goals because I have a group of 4 women. It's fantastic. We're called the BOD Squad, which does not stand for body. It stands for board of directors, like your own personal board of directors. And we meet every 6 weeks to like check in on our progress against our goals and help, work with each other to support each other, hold each other accountable. And like each of those women, I just respect to the ends of the earth and back. And so they hold a high standard for me. I hold a high standard for them. And so this has been a more structured way of checking in on goals.
That's excellent. Accountability too. And also, was it rising tide lifts all boats as well, for instance?
Yes.
Like if you might feeling a little bit down, you're like, oh, well, the 6 weeks are coming up, etc. And in terms of the priorities of life now, where everyone talks about health and money and all these things that you talk, are they all pretty equal in terms of priority, or you put one above the other?
No, I feel like my life is like very seasonal, in that I'll go hard in like one area and I'll be completely underdeveloped in another area, and that might switch several months later or several years later. And so for a very, very long time, it was like sport, money to pay for sport, and then like career, and then like relationships was like way down the bottom, right? Like dating was just like not even a factor for so long. And now I would say like probably like career is number one because I like retired from my final sport 2 years ago. And, lifestyle and relationships and family and friends are sort of like up there a little bit more. Whereas I'm still training in a various number of things, but I don't have big goals on the sporting front at the moment.
It's interesting you talk about like relationships and money and things where there's probably like a tangible number of things you can do. Like, oh, I want to have $10,000 of savings. So it's like this number, or like a trophy, you want to win the world championships, etc. I'm curious to know, like through the journey, let's say, oh, I want to start investing, for instance, and I start putting money aside to invest. And all of a sudden there's a Trump tweet or something and the market goes down 30%. And you're like, oh, I was there. But then all of a sudden some external factors. I'm kind of curious around that as well, how you deal with that.
I would not recommend anyone follow my investment strategy. So okay. I have like an extreme barbell strategy, I would say, where I put money into shares and never look at it. Like I mostly have index funds.
Probably the best advice that
that's a great thing.
Like Warren Buffett and other people, famous investors, have said to me. So yes,
that works very well for me. And then I have like quite a large proportion of my portfolio in like extremely high risk, extremely illiquid venture capital. And
so you work in the space, so you're an expert, you're a domain expert, right?
Yes. Now, like I would recommend, like if you want to invest in early stage companies, like 5 to 10% of your investment portfolio should be in that asset class. Mine's probably up around like 40%, and I work in that space. And so, I've also like doubled down with the career risk in that space too. And so
holistically, it's a little bit all in, but that's okay. All in is also probably one of the mentalities or mental traits. I've had some athletes where they're like, if you go all in on something, you actually feel the reward at the end of the day where you kind of come out with that. So, again, we're not talking investment advice here. I don't have a license, so we can't talk about it anyway. So that's okay.
Well, I think, to like round out that point, I have a very high risk tolerance. So like I quit my job in my mid-20s and just like went to the US with like $2,000 in my bank account and was like, I'll figure it out because I want to be here to train. And I ended up staying 8 months, just like had a one-way flight. And so like I learned how to live on effectively nothing, stay with friends, pet sit my way around the country, like coach on the side. And so like all through my sporting career, I had like these times where I would like have money because I'd work intensely and then like take 8 months off to go and focus on sport and play overseas and then like back and forth. Now I like think about wealth in terms of I'm still young enough to take several big swings. And so you can build like meaningful wealth by having equity in a company, by starting a company, by investing in startup companies. And so almost all of those go to zero, but sometimes they become Canva. And so is it worth it to have a high risk tolerance and take a few big swings? I'm like, well, I'm young enough that I still have time to build material wealth the slow way if I need to.
And just touching on Canva as an example of a success story in Australia, and you've probably worked very closely with Canva or with groups that have invested in Canva or maybe even invested in Canva yourself, I'm not too sure. But the point is, like, what was different about Mel and the team that you've seen that's different to other startups and scale ups, and what sort of traits of success have you seen through their eyes that you go, wow, that's something else?
It's a tricky question because if you think about a venture capital portfolio, so I used to work at Blackbird, which was the first investor in Canva. And that fund made, 20, 25, 30 investments, and Canva was the breakout one. But ask them at the beginning of that fund when they made all those investments, which one would be the winner?
Flip a coin.
Honestly, yes. And so, yes, there's skill and craft in like picking the best founders, and you are looking for traits like, are they lifelong hungry learners? Are they obsessed with the problem and the customer? Do they have high resilience? What's the dynamic in the co-founding team? And those are sort of like table stakes in some ways. You're looking for these like epic humans, but you can back 30 epic humans and not know which of them will be the breakout success. And so it's tempting to like look at hindsight and be like, this is what that makes a winner. But I don't think we have the data yet. I think there's emerging ways that we're getting that data, but for now it's like still all human judgment, and it's very hard to just use hindsight.
That's fascinating you mentioned that, because there's an analogy that I use when I was emceeing at a breakfast at a school event, and the guest, who was very, very successful, said, I quit in grade 10. There's no point in going to university, right? And so you get a whole raft of people. Then someone says, well, if you're on the operating table, would you like someone to not go on to university? And he's like, I hadn't thought about that, right? So there's this advice from everywhere, right? And like the hindsight advice is going back like, I did it this way and I'm very successful. But there's so much, like so many stories, and you go, I don't know where to quit school, don't quit school, quit uni, don't quit uni. And this, teenagers now going,
Yeah, I mean, there's this great book called Super Founders, and I was just revisiting it yesterday because we have this image of founders as being like college dropouts, super young, eating ramen, coding in their basement, living in SF. And this guy, Ali, got 30,000 touch points of data across like 200 unicorn founders. And he's like, well, what actually makes a unicorn founder? And, the average age that those founders started the companies is 34. They're more likely to have a PhD than have dropped out of college. Many of them live in SF, but most of them moved there after their companies started taking off. What college you went to actually doesn't really matter. Like the majority of them went to colleges that weren't even in the top 100. And so it's sort of like myth busting all of these things that is like your stereotypical founder.
You mentioned also about lifelong learner. Are you a lifelong learner? Do you love learning? And what do you do, I suppose, to learn?
I do love learning. I am particularly obsessed by sort of like psychology, mindset, high performance thinking. And so I would say I focus a lot of my learning on that space. And that is also what I have ended up speaking and writing about for many years with many clients in that space. And so I love to geek out on a bit of psychology.
Excellent. Yeah, my wife's a trained psychologist, child psychologist. It's interesting in terms of different thinkings, and also just the different macro, like the bigger things versus little things. Sometimes I sweat the little things. She's like, oh, it's a little thing versus a big thing, and there's lots of different angles. You listen to podcasts, you watch sort of the sports documentaries, the high performance things. Are you into that?
Yeah, I love to read, and so my mum was an author. Like we grew up with thousands of books in the house, and so I definitely love to read first, probably podcast second, TV and videos like a distant third. But I also think, I love to spend time with people, right? So we're having this conversation, but there's incredible researchers, scientists, thought leaders across the world. And one of the benefits of being a pro athlete and traveling the world is you get access to a lot of those people.
Yep, and we're on Scoreboard, which is about the stories from the game of sport, which includes business stories as well. You're certainly interested in the business of sport, from a former athlete to the business life. Do you want to talk or give the listeners a bit of understanding about some of the projects that you're involved in that involves the business of sport?
A bunch. I think it's I think in Australia, we're just waking up to like, oh, sport's an asset class. Whereas internationally, that's been the case for much longer. I've done a few different things in this space. And so I spent, just over a year co-founding a startup where we were buying professional soccer teams around the world. I was pretty involved in the early stages of growing Athletic Ventures, which is a syndicate and now a fund of elite athletes investing in startups. I co-launched the Athlete Fellowship with StartMate to help athletes break into careers in startups. I actually just got back from Necker Island, where I was like speaking on investing in women's sports and, whether we should put our money towards stories and the media side or stadiums and the real estate side. And like, as an investor, how do you think strategically about making money in women's sports now that is like finally long overdue on the rise? And so I think my career will continue to intersect sport and startups for many years. And as I said before, like, I just have this deep passion for the mindset from elite sport and how do we bring that across to leadership, to business, to startups. And I think that's the most magical thing that we can take from sport to the rest of our lives.
Absolutely. And Christie, why do you reckon it is that Australia's taken a little while to sort of wake up to being, understanding sport as an asset class? Is it because the leagues sort of own 100% of these things as opposed to private ownership?
So most of the leagues aren't privately owned in Australia. And so that's sort of the first problem. You actually can't own it and see it as an asset. Now, like the basketball, the soccer, and like some of the other emerging leagues are privately owned. And so now we're starting to see more investment in that. And we're also not seeing the like growth in like, we don't have the population to support like the insane growth in like viewership and media rights and merch sales that come along with it. Like if you think of sport as a business, you effectively make money in three ways. Like one is the media rights, which is still largely traditional TV deals, but like increasingly becoming other media channels. The second way is like your match day revenue. And so how do you sell tickets, merch, concessions on the day, your hospitality and corporate boxes? And then the third bucket is sponsorship. And so it's not a complicated business, but if you look at it in Australia, like those leagues are much tougher to make money in because you don't have the like fan base to support some of those levers.
And a particular interest yourself into football, into soccer. What was the interest there? Where did that come from your point of view?
Soccer is the sport with money, like to be really candid. And I just gave you the three levers of how you make money. Well, soccer has a fourth one, and that is player sales. And so the transfer market for players, which like if you don't know how this works, like imagine that you own a club and I own a club in soccer. And I have a player on my team that you look at and you're like, wow, I really want Jack on my team. You have to pay me as the club owner a transfer fee. And then obviously, the salary and stuff to Jack. And so that market of club to club payments for players is $10 billion a year. And so that is humongous, right? And so the premise behind the startup that we built was individual teams do not typically make money from player transfers because I sold Jack. Now I have a gap on my roster and I have to buy another player to fill it. But if you bought teams at all different levels of performance, you could sign players to the lower ranked teams. As those players improve, you can move them up to the other teams that you own and then ultimately sell them from your best ranked teams for much higher value. So you're capturing the arbitrage if you're good at player development from developing a player from like, the bottom leagues all the way through to the very top leagues.
Right. So you're thinking very differently, and you're thinking around about the correlation between your investments too. I think that's very important. And I see VC firms and other things like they're all customers of each other and supporting each other, etc. So it's very sort of not non-existent, but you've thought about the sport a different way. Your advice to some of these people that are coming through as want to be professional athletes, want to be high performance athletes such as yourself, what's some advice that you can give them now? Let's call it that they're 15.
I mean, I think you only need three things to be world class, assuming that you have some potential, right? Like, let's say you genetically are born with a certain height, physicality, etc., and you picked a sport that matches that. probably by the time you're 15, you know if you've nailed that selection or not. After that, you only need 3 things: a great coach to train with people better than you and a killer work ethic. And so go and find the best coach you can get. I was like so lucky to just join a club when I was very young that had one of the top coaches in the country and the world. But you might not be in that environment. And so like, who is the best coach? Do you have to move to access them? Do you have to pay more for one-on-one training? How do you get as much time with the coach as you can? The second is train with people better than you. Like, humans naturally conform to the standards around us. That is just our wiring. Like, you didn't want to get kicked out of the caveman tribe because isolation meant death. And so we just conform to the people around us. Now, if you go and train with a bunch of people that are better than you, so like the older age group, if you're a female, go and train with the men's team. I did this in beach volleyball by like moving to the US for like 6 months a year, because all the best beach volleyball players in the country there live in one suburb in California. And so I was just like, I'm just going to live there and train with the best players in the country. And so like, how do you join a training environment where the standard is higher than your current standard, because you'll rise to that? And then the work ethic's kind of up to you.
Yeah, right. Some great advice there, and I haven't heard that before. So that's excellent advice to people out there. Also, I've got 3 young kids that are playing sport, and there's a bit of specialisation going on at an early age. Your views on specialisation, considering you did a lot of trampolining at your youth, but then obviously later on you didn't specialise in trampolining. You had 2 other different sports as well.
Yeah, I was very single-minded. I think my mum tells stories of like, hey, do you want to, try some karate this term? And I'd be like, no. But my mum also said, I'm only going to drive you twice a week. And so that's it. You only get She's like, if you want to go more often, like, you got to find your own carpool.
Do whatever you want within this realm, right?
Yeah. She's like, I'll drive you twice. And if you want to train more, like, find your own carpool or like take the bus. I was like 10. Like, actually, okay, funny story. So like gymnastics, like every little girl like shows up with their hair like perfectly braided, and the mums are like, they're all there with the ribbons and the hair and everything. And like, my mum was like, I'm going to show up for your competition, but I'm not getting up and going early in the morning. And so when I was 9, she taught me to braid my own hair so that she wouldn't have to get up early to like take me to the competition. She just like sent me in the carpool, sent me with the team. So yeah, she let me drive my athletic career like from a very young age, I would say. In terms of specialization, I don't have kids. If I did have kids, I would not allow them to specialize too early, because I think if you look at the research that's coming out today, early specialization tends to lead to higher levels of burnout and injury, and actually lower levels of success. And what sports would I put them in? I'd probably give them a body weight based sport, so like a gymnastics or a martial art, because it teaches like incredible self-discipline, but also body awareness. And so those sports allow you to pick up other sports much more quickly. If you tell me to like move my elbow to 10 degrees, I actually have a very good sense of where my body is in space, and those types of sports teach you that. And then I might pick something like basketball for a team sport, because it's a team, but there's still enough individual accountability on that team to like track your own performance. And it's also a sport that requires like 360-degree awareness, which I think is pretty useful, like to allow you to go on to play any other sport. And then in a pure mercenary perspective, I would put my kids in sports that have money. And so, gender plays a big part in that. If you're a young girl, like, I kind of wish my mum had put me in tennis, because top 10 in the world in tennis looks very different to top 10 in the world in trampolining in terms of your life outcomes. But it's the same amount of work.
There you go. I've seen some statistics, and I don't have the actual source, but I believe it's true. The drop-off rate of girls after school in sport is actually quite material and quite a problem. And
during school.
And during school. Okay, there you go. I'm curious to know, as I said, I don't have a source, but I've seen a few different research articles about it. What's your view on that, and how to change that to get the talent pool to continue to go different sports to uprise women's sport?
Yeah, this is a very complex issue. I would love to see more women stay in sport. And I know that leads to much more success later in their career. If there's like quite old research now, but 94% of women in the C-suite in the US played sport, and over 50% of them played at a college level or higher. And so there is like a direct line from sport to later career success. Also, it's just great for your health and body, right? Now, what makes girls drop out? And so there's multiple things here. Like there's body image. And so the message like strong is beautiful really matters, right? I got told, oh, your like quads are so big, or like your shoulders are so big. Like, don't you want to feel like a girl? And I was like,
Yep.
I can lift you above my head. Like that's more badass than like feeling girly. But that messaging matters a lot when you're a teenager. Small things like uniforms, like white shorts and soccer. That's a really terrible idea for a girl, right? Because the embarrassment factor if something happens on their period is like so high. They'll never come back to that game. Facilities and change rooms. Like if you even look around Australia, the number of fields that even have women's toilets, like isn't even at 50-50 yet. The quality of those facilities, when you look at that compared to like boys sports, is not there. Access to teams. And so, there's not always
big thing, huge thing.
Yeah, there's not always a girls' cricket team or a girls' footy team or a girls'
I've heard
soccer
that a
team.
number of times on my podcast. Mel Jones and all these people saying, Ali Brigginshaw, she was like, they said don't play rugby league because there's no team. Sorry.
Exactly. And then media. So I'm so excited that we finally have like little boys running around in like Sam Kerr jerseys and like having female role models. And so there's a friend of mine has done this like incredible research around like role models and bravery. And, her finding is that like young girls have historically had heroes that they look up to within their community. So like their mum, their teachers, things like that. And boys have had heroes that are external to them, like Ronaldo and like LeBron and, heroes that you see on TV. Now that is shifting, and that boys are finding heroes in their own community of both genders, and girls are finally starting to see heroes out there that look like them, like Simone Biles and Sam Kerr and, all these other incredible female athletes that are finally on TV. And so we've seen the shift in sports media. Like it used to be under 5% of all sports media was women's sports. That's now up around 14 or 15%. But most of that gain has been in non-traditional TV channels. So it's in streaming, it's in social media. Those are the other two main ones, and some digital media as well. And so we're nowhere even close to 50-50 in terms of like what we show on TV in terms of women's sports. So there's a bunch of factors.
There's a long way to go, but certainly some identification of problems, which then over time, and hopefully quicker the better in terms of solutions, I think identifying problems and understanding problems is one of the hardest parts. And now it's like get the solution. And just touching on that role model thing, I've got my oldest collects AFL trading cards, and now the packets are around 50-50 in terms of players from the AFLW and AFL, and he's now knowing the names, which I think is a huge thing as a kid. You know the names of someone, you see them on the screen, and you half follow them, and he could probably rattle off, I would say, half the Brisbane Lions women's team in the AFLW now, knowing those names. And if he saw one of them, he'd be like, autograph, please. So I think it's a big thing. Honestly, I think the continuity and awareness, and you said social media, sometimes he's too young for social media and whatnot, but certainly the following, the fan base, the capturing of the story. I follow a heap of female athletes and can see behind the scenes, etc. I think that's different to when we were growing up. Well, I was growing up anyway. Christie, I'm going to touch on some personality traits of yourself briefly. And I'm going to throw a couple of words at you, and you're going to say, are you this particular personality trait? Has it been beneficial? Has it been strong? The first one I'm going to start is confidence. Are you a confident person? Have you always been a confident person? And are you a confident person now?
Yes, is the short answer. I think of confidence in several tiers. And so the first tier is like, I would say like unwarranted confidence, in that you're like think of a teenage boy like bragging about how they're going to get the girl. It's like kind of unwarranted, right? It's bravado. The second type is sort of the like talk yourself into it confidence. Like you're standing on the trampoline about to do a scary skill, and in that moment, you just like talk yourself into being brave, right? It doesn't last long, but it's like sometimes enough to get you started. Then the third type of confidence is confidence based on competence. So I've done this before. I know that I can do it again. Look, every time you get in your car, you're confident, right? You know how to drive. And the same, like I get on the trampoline, I know how to do a double backflip because I've done 2,000 of them before. And then the final type of confidence, which I think is the most important, is this loop of I have done hard things before, I back myself to do hard things again. And so maybe I don't know how to do this thing today, but I'm going to give it a shot. And if I fail, I'll have learned something, I'll go back and try it again. And over time, I will master that difficult thing. And so this is the loop that translates from sport to every other part of your life. And, you know, I learned this lesson very young. I remember I was 8 and I'd won the state championships in trampolining for my age group, which was under 11s. So I was pretty young for the age group, and qualified for nationals and went to nationals. And only 5 athletes even qualified for nationals. And I came dead last. And I just remember like sobbing in my dad's arms. And my coach said to me after that, you know, she was like, hey, like nobody likes to lose, but you saw what the other athletes did. Like we can go back in training and like work on those skills so you come back next year and are better. And I did that. And there are many scary tricks in trampolining and pushed myself to do them and trained more and came back and won nationals for that age group the next year. And so like that's the loop, right? Here's this hard thing I don't know how to do, but I've done hard things before. I can probably figure this one out. And so like, do you have this sense of meta confidence? I think I do.
Awesome. That's so in depth in terms of breaking down the different levels of confidence. I haven't heard that before, so thank you so much for that. The next word I'm going to throw at you is structured.
Yes and no. So I am constantly torn between routine and freedom. Like my dream life is living across like 3 different continents, right? People are like, how do you just like live out of a suitcase and you don't know where you're going to be next week? And it's so fly by the seat of your pants. I love that. But I also am addicted to the routine of training. Like get up, go to training every morning, have that routine. And so I am on the 2 extremes of the spectrum.
I think most people are torn sometimes between structured and unstructured. Are you a 0 inbox person?
Never. I have never once got to 0. That is a pipe dream of mine. I would aspire to achieve that one day.
Does it give you anxiety, the amount of numbers in your inbox?
I feel on top of it if I can see space at the bottom.
I like it. Interesting. One more word before we get onto the scoreboard. A couple of things we do in this podcast. The word is resilient.
Do I feel like I have this?
Yeah. Are you resilient? Is it something which you've talked about some of the incidents, or not incidents, the life in sport and life in business where there's ups and downs, but you've obviously learned a lot from it.
Yes, I think I do have this. But I've also trained it as a skill set, and I think everybody can train it. And it's very deterministic when we say like, that person's smart, that person's strong, that person's resilient, that person's funny. Like all of those, you know, we can train knowledge and skills, but we can also train character traits. And I see sport develop this character trait in many, many people. And I think that's why we see that stat where so many leaders were athletes. And, you know, you have a tight feedback loop in sport and you are going to lose. It's unavoidable. And so how do you pick yourself back up? What do you do after that? So after you have suffered a setback, I have this incredibly strong bias to action. What do I do next? How do I work harder? How do I be even better than what I originally aspired to be? But I learnt that sense of resilience from sport.
What about being better versus your relationship with winning?
So when I was younger, I would say like my top value was like winning and being the best. Now my top value is growth. And so I think they somewhat go hand in hand, right? It is, if you think back to a time where you won something, but it was easy, right? You didn't really have to try or exert yourself. It is quite unfulfilling. And if you contrast that to a time where you did not win, but you had the game of your life, you took it to that other team, you scored higher than you ever have, you hit a PB score, that can still be wildly fulfilling, even though you didn't win. And so I think with age and experience, like I have a more nuanced viewpoint here where ideally you're in a world where your best is also the best, right? So your best results in you winning. But I'm also conscious that we are all on different journeys, and I'd rather test myself against people better than me than have an easy win against people worse than me.
That's a great way of putting it. Fabulous insights there, because it is discussed quite openly in this podcast about the relationship with winning along the way. And Trevor Hendy in a recent podcast said winning at all costs was his mantra. Now it's winning at all levels, his own levels. Like in terms of, he said as soon as he changed that mindset, it was like, actually, if you want to be the person you are, you need to win at your level, do the things to win at your levels, but not necessarily about holding that trophy up.
Yeah.
And I think Georgia Godwin as well changed the perspective of goals. The goals never include a trophy, so it was really interesting around that.
I mean, the goals definitely include gold medals for me. But I think once you step out of sport, you also have to redefine your concept of winning. Like, what is winning in business, right?
Well, what defines success, I suppose?
Yeah,
like,
there's not
big
one
house, big money
winner.
and everything. Oh, well, this person has a big house, but they might actually be a person you don't want to hang out with.
Yeah, and also, like, I always ask founders, like, what's your ideal lifestyle? Because you have to weigh up, do I want to be on the startup path, working crazy hours? Like, you just have to work really, really hard in this space. And you'll be doing that for a decade, but you could make incredibly huge impact and you have a shot at real wealth too. Or would you rather like build a business that gives you tons of lifestyle flexibility and enough money to like, feel wealthy in your peer set, or have enough money to do what you want to do, but actually you value time more? And so that's very personal, but it's very obvious that there's not one winner in business.
Yep, no, absolutely. And it's a bit like this, going back to that discussion around quit school, don't quit school, get an apprenticeship, start a business, blah, 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 lots of different things, right? Christie, your scoreboard moment, which is a moment in your life where it's very vivid. It's a picture. You might have already discussed it, so forgive me if you've already discussed it. But around, it's almost like a sliding doors moment where you go, I remember that moment, and from then things changed.
I was reflecting on this when I was 13. I was already 8 years into my trampolining career. And definitely at that age where I didn't really listen to my parents too much as a teenager, but my coach was like one of the most important people in my life. And I remember showing up to training one day, just another day of training, and one of the older athletes in the gym, John, he went for this new trick. He'd done all the drills and the reps and everything, and he was in his early 20s. And I think he was doing like a triple somersault with 2.5 twists, like insanely difficult trick, 10 meters in the air. And he fell. Like he got disorientated in the air, came down on his head. And I just remember the crash of that moment, and then the silence in the gym. And my coach like leaped onto the trampoline, and John was just like, I can't feel my legs. I can't feel my legs. And he turned out to be quadriplegic, like some movement in his arms. But that day, like my coach walked out of the gym and just didn't come back. And I was pretty crushed at that as well. And I'm 13, right? Like dealing with like, holy shit, that could happen to me. The most important person in my life, my coach, has like just walked out of the gym. And trampoline coaches like don't grow on trees, like, and the club had a real difficulty finding someone to replace him. And I think they got this guy from the circus, actually, who cared a little bit more about making it fun than he did about actually preparing us to like be real athletes in this sport. And, I trained with him for a year and wasn't very good, to be honest. I think I actually went backwards in that year. And then I remember, I don't know, a year and a half later, um, my coach came back to the gym and he brought John as well. Like they came together, and John started his coaching career from a wheelchair, like incredible. And he still coaches today, like more than 20 years later. And my coach came back and I was just like, wow, like the role of a coach and the impact of that was probably like the turning point where I was like, I probably took that for granted a little bit when I was younger. And now like the relationship I have with my coach is like so valuable to me. And I've had some incredible coaches over the years, but that's definitely one moment I'll remember.
Yes, that's a beautiful moment. That coming back to coach, obviously harrowing to witness that as a 13-year-old. But in your advice to people who want to be high performance, one of them was the coach. So I think that's kind of come full circle in terms of seeing that moment and seeing, as you said, the importance of a wonderful coach. Christie, I'm going to ask you about your all-time favourite sporting moment. It can include yourself as well, or as a spectator. Up to you, or both, doesn't matter. But something that's very vivid in your memory in terms of your all-time favourite sporting moment.
I'll tell a personal story, but because I want to honour actually my beach volleyball partner at the time. And so I started beach volleyball very late, right? I was 23 the first time I picked up a volleyball, and I was frankly awful to begin with. And I just went from never having played to training 8 to 10 times a week. And 2.5 years in to this sport, like I had the basics down, but I wouldn't say I was really elite or professional in any way.
You're jumping around the court. They're going, oh, geez.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes when they would announce me onto the court, I would come out and do a backflip. And I was like, that was my signature move because nobody knew me for my volleyball skills. They just knew me as the backflip girl. But that was the first year I went to the US. And so I remember being in California. There's so many great players there, so many. And there was an incredible player called Ivana, and she was Polish originally, had come to the US for college and just ended up staying. And she was such a free spirit and a gypsy. And there was a huge tournament coming up. So on the national tour in the US, it was one of the biggest tournaments in Hermosa Beach, which is the suburb that every top player lives and trains in. So everybody plays it. And I was just like, Ivana, please play with me, begging her. She was way better than me. I was like, come on, we'll have so much fun. And she was like, oh, I don't know. I'm not sure that I'm going to play. And I was like, come on, please, 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 please. And she's like, oh, I'll let you know tonight. And I was like, entry's closed tonight. And she eventually, 15 minutes to spare, she's like, okay, I'm in. And so I enter us in the tournament. And we show up and I have 0 ranking points because I'm pretty bad and new to the country. And so we're in the qualifier event to just try and get into the tournament. And we barely scrape out. We win 15-13 in the third set in the qualifier event just to get into the main tournament. But then we started the main tournament, and as an athlete, you kind of live for those games where everything goes right. You just drop into the zone and it feels easy and things just work. And we played the 4th seeds and we beat them. And I was like, holy crap. And then we took their kind of path through the tournament. So then we won the next game and the next game. And I was like, I've never played this well. And it was just, the first time we'd played together as well. And sometimes the partnership dynamic just works right off the bat. And we made it all the way through to quarterfinals the next day. And it's 8 a.m. Sunday morning, Super Sunday, they call it, on the beach. And I have been at the beach stretching for an hour, and our game's at 8:30, and Ivana is nowhere to be seen. And I'm calling her and texting her, and it's nothing. It's 8:10, can't find her anywhere. And I'm just desperately calling her, sending everyone to look for her. 8:20, she's still not there. And I was freaking out. I was serving the ball over the net, jogging to the other side and picking it up to warm myself up. And then 8:25, and the opponents are just looking over in disbelief that someone would just not show up for, the biggest tournament of the year. And at 8:27, she just waltzes onto the beach with a smile and a dance in her step. And she's like, you ready to play? Can't wait. And I am stressed out of my mind. And needless to say, we lost the first set of that game because I was stressed and she was not warmed up. But we ended up coming back and winning in quarterfinal, and then we won the semi, and we made it into the finals. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm 2 years into this sport. I have no rights to be here. I barely even made it into the tournament. And here we are in the finals. And I remember I had a bunch of friends that like came into the stands and they'd learnt the Aussie, Aussie, Aussie chant for me, and like so touched. And we're in the finals, super, super close game. So first set's like point for point for point, and then the opponents like made a couple of errors right at the end. So we got the first set in the bag, and we're in the second set, and we were up like 17-12, and then we had lost a string of points, like 5 points in a row, and it was 17 all. And I was feeling just like the mojo was gone, like we had dropped out of the zone. The magic wasn't working. Our opponents had all of the momentum. And Ivana calls a timeout, and we sit down, and she's like, let's get excited. And I remember I said something inane back. I was like, oh, you're setting really well, like great playing. And she's like, that is not excited. And she grabs my hands and pulls me up, and she starts like jumping and laughing and dancing on the sand. And I just remember like doing that moment with her, and everybody looking at us like we were crazy, and she just totally immersed in the joy and excitement of the game. And we go back on the court, and they serve the ball, and I hit like a nice little cut shot. We win the next point, 18-17. And she goes back to serve, and she lines up for a jump serve, which is like high power but high risk. Tosses the ball, like connects with a grunt. And the announcers had dubbed her like the Polish hammer because her arm swing was super heavy. And she serves that ball and hits the top of the tape of the net and like teeters there for an instant and then like drops into the court. And like so lucky. And now it's like 19-17. She goes back to serve again, tosses the ball, jump serves again, and it hits the tape again. And I remember like standing at the net, like watching our opponents like scramble towards that ball, like complete disbelief on their faces, and it drops over onto their court again. Match point with 2017. Our opponents won the next point. And I just remember thinking like, it's match point. They're going to serve me. I'm definitely the weaker player on the court. I was just like, just stay calm, like find the fun in the moment, like smile. And Ivana just like looks over it to me and she's like, let's be excited, right? And she like laughs and jumps a little bit. And the ball comes to me, pass, set, hit the ball straight into the middle of the court in between the two players. And that was just a dream run, right? Like I won that tournament way, way, way before I should have. And Ivana ended up passing away a couple of years later from like minor complications from a surgery. And I always look back at that moment and it's just like a reminder of like find the joy in the sport and the moment, because she just lived that like to the absolute extreme, to the point of, it overflowed into every area of her life where she was just like fun and dance and joy. And like that is the heart of sport, right? And if you find the joy, you play well. But if you find the joy and the love in the game, like that spills into every part of your life.
That's a beautiful moment. It just shows about energy and levels of energy as well. And I've had Nat Cook on the podcast recently as well, and she's just sort of talking about the posture, embracing, loving, the gratefulness as well of being there. And I suppose come a pressure situation, you can almost see a little bit of a non-serious side, but going embrace it. Whatever happens, happens. It's on the volleyball court. We're not on the operating table. It's a really interesting kind of, conundrum that maybe some people should, pause and reflect and not have that sour look on their face, but like, let's just dance.
Yeah. So I try and live that more and more and like pass that on to some of my other beach volleyball partners.
Amazing. One final question now. Our previous guest, Alex Gardner, was a GT3 driver, and he's 18 years old, and he is going for his dream of Le Mans, the 24-hour circuit, and lots of different things, and a very good head on his shoulders. And he, the previous guest was Rupert McCall, who is a poet, and he spelled the word Queensland backwards. So to get your brain sort of thinking right now on a Monday morning, by the way, at 10 o'clock for the week, I'm going to ask you to spell a word or a brand or something backwards. Now, you've got 15 seconds to do it, right? So you've got plenty of time. Maybe I might give you 20. We'll see how we go. I'm pretty flex on the rules. I'm a bit open. So we've got, so as I said, Alex drove an Aston Martin. So Aston Martin, I'm going to have to get you to spell backwards, Christie Jenkins, and your time starts now.
Okay. NITRAM space NOTSA.
Jackpot. Did it. I reckon you did it in about 10.
Okay.
Nailed it.
Yeah. I love Mondays, by the way, and so this is when I'm at my peak.
You're at your peak? Awesome. I got you at your peak, and you nailed Aston Martin backwards in about 10 seconds, which the answer was NITRAMNOTSA. And for those of you thinking that I just nailed that out, I didn't. I was reading it. So Aston Martin backwards. Christie Jenkins, thank you so much for being part of the Scoreboard, the podcast. I really do appreciate you giving your time this morning to talk about your story, the ups and downs, where you are now at your career, the intersections of sport and business. I really do wish you well in the next phase of your life at Techstars and also in a new city. Looking forward to catching up and looking forward to following your progress. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sport will always be a part of my life.